After swim class, my 7-year-old student took a Benadryl and asked, "How long can you hold your breath underwater?" I smiled. "Maybe like 120 seconds, why?" "Well, I can do 3 minutes, because me and Daddy play mermaids every night." I raised an eyebrow. "And how does that game usually go?" "When it's 8:30, we get in the special water. No moving allowed, even when the sparkles come." "The sparkles?" "Yeah, they come after you count to 100 under the water." My brother Mikey was the best at getting sparkles. One time he got so many that Daddy had to call an ambulance. She yawned. "But that was before he moved to Grandma's house. Except Grandma died last year, so I don't know where Mikey really is." That's when I noticed the streaks of concealer on her shoulders. Yellow-green bruises showed underneath. 3 minutes is a long time to hold your breath. I kept my voice steady while checking my phone. Her mom was already 20 minutes late. "Not if you practice every night. Daddy has a special stopwatch just for mermaid time." Emily rubbed her eyes and more concealer smeared away, revealing purple fingerprints. "Last week I did 3 minutes and 17 seconds. That's my record." "That's impressive." The entire pool hall was now completely empty. "What happens if you come up early?" "That's losing. Losers don't get breakfast." She said it matter-of-fact like she was explaining game rules. She crossed her legs, and her sweatpants rode up, revealing deep circular bruises around both ankles. Rope marks. "Katie only lasts 40 seconds because she's 5 and she's weak, so she hasn't had breakfast in 4 days." My stomach dropped. "Katie's your sister?" "Yeah. She cries too much during practice, so now she has to do it twice, morning and night." Emily shifted, and her swim bracelet slid up. Underneath was a faded hospital band. "Daddy says crying means you're not trying hard enough." I gently touched the hospital band. "What's this from?" "Oh, that's from when I slept too long in the tub." She twisted it around her tiny wrist. "The doctor asked, but Daddy explained that doctors don't understand mermaid training." The Benadryl was making her drowsier. I tried texting the school counselor, but the automated response came back immediately. "Office closed after 5 p.m. "Does Mommy play mermaids too?" "No, she watches TV super loud during practice time." Emily's words were starting to slur. I scrolled through my contacts looking for anyone who could help. Every teacher had gone home. "My daddy's the best." Emily smiled sleepily. "He gives us medicine to help us stay underwater every night. He said most daddies don't do that." "Emily, has anyone else seen you play mermaids?" "No, silly, just Daddy, and the camera." She picked at where more concealer was flaking off, revealing greenish-yellow bruises down her arms. "He records us with the waterproof camera. He says it's for his special folder to show other daddies how to train mermaids." 40 minutes late. Daddy was a Navy SEAL. Her eyes were barely open now. "He can hold his breath for 5 whole minutes. He showed us once, but Mommy ran out and threw up, so he doesn't demonstrate anymore." "What happened to Mikey? Before he moved in with your grandma?" "He was really good. His record was 3 minutes and 47 seconds. She yawned. "But then he breathed in the water and ruined everything." Daddy was disappointed because Mikey was so close to becoming a real merman. "What?" "That's when you transform. When you become a real mermaid forever and ever." Daddy said if I don't make 4 minutes tonight, I'll have to go live with Grandma too. Suddenly, her eyes were filled with light. "That's why tonight is special. He said if I make it to 4 minutes, I'll grow a tail and never have to come up for air again." I brought her inside for some food, and as soon as she was distracted, I dialed 911. "I need police and CPS at the aquatic center immediately. A child just disclosed systematic drowning abuse." I rattled off the address while watching the parking lot entrance. "Katie's home by herself right now," Emily suddenly remembered. "She's waiting in the bathroom. Daddy makes her sit there until we get back for practice." "What if I don't make it to 4 minutes?" Emily asked drowsily. "Will I have to go away too?" A gray Corolla finally pulled into the empty lot. I stepped in front of Emily. Her mother saw me on the phone and her face changed. She knew exactly why I was calling. "Is that Mommy?" Emily tried to stand but wobbled. "I can't be late for practice. Tonight's the night I become a real mermaid." The mother stepped out of the car, but stopped dead when she saw the flashing lights pulling into the lot behind her. 2 police cars rolled up with their lights on, but no sirens. Her face went from confused to angry in about 2 seconds. She started yelling that this was all a big misunderstanding about swimming lessons, while her hands shook as she dug through her purse for her phone. I kept my hand on Emily's shoulder while she watched her mom trying to call someone. The officers got out of their cars and walked over to us. One of them bent down to Emily's level while his partner moved toward her mother. The mother kept saying this was just swimming practice, and I didn't understand their family's training methods. Emily looked up at the officer who was talking to her and asked if she was in trouble for not making it to 4 minutes yet. I told her she didn't do anything wrong and squeezed her shoulder gently. The officer asked Emily about the marks on her ankles that were showing under her sweatpants. She pulled up the fabric proudly and explained how Daddy uses special ropes to help her stay underwater during practice. The officer's face went white as he wrote this down in his notebook. He asked her more questions about the ropes, and she told him they go around her ankles and wrists sometimes to keep her from floating up too early. The mother started getting louder, saying we were twisting everything Emily said. An ambulance pulled up, and 2 EMTs got out with their equipment. Emily's face lit up, and she asked them if they were here to help her become a real mermaid. The male EMT knelt down and told her gently they were just making sure she was healthy. I saw him look at his partner with worried eyes. The female EMT started checking Emily's vitals while she kept talking about how tonight was supposed to be special. The mother tried to push past the officer to get to Emily, but he blocked her path. She started screaming that she'd sue me for kidnapping and that I'd always had it out for her family because Emily was the best swimmer in my class. The officer told her to calm down, but she kept yelling about lawyers and lawsuits. Detective Lee showed up in an unmarked car and walked over to me. I showed him my phone where I'd taken pictures of Emily's bruises before the concealer had rubbed off completely. He looked at each photo carefully and asked if I'd seen any other signs of abuse in my classes. I told him about Emily's constant exhaustion and how she'd fallen asleep in the pool twice this month. He wrote everything down and asked me to email him the photos right away. While we were talking, he called dispatch and told them to send units to check on Katie at the family's house immediately. He gave them the address from the mother's driver's license. Emily kept asking when she could go home for practice, and I had to keep telling her we were just making sure she was safe. The EMTs said they needed to take Emily to the hospital for a full exam. She climbed into the ambulance, still talking about growing her tail tonight. About 20 minutes later, another police car pulled up, and an officer got out carrying a small girl. Katie was completely silent as they brought her past us. She wouldn't look at anyone and kept her eyes on the ground. When they lifted her into a second ambulance, I saw the same circular bruises around her tiny wrists that Emily had on her ankles. The rope marks were deep and purple. The officer who found her told Detective Lee she'd been sitting in an empty bathtub fully dressed, just waiting. She hadn't said a single word since they found her. At the hospital, I found a quiet corner and called Amara Espinoza's cell phone. It went to voicemail, so I left a detailed message about everything that had happened. I told her about the drowning practice and the rope marks and how both girls were at the hospital now. I knew she'd want to get the school's crisis team together first thing in the morning. The ER was busy, but they took Emily and Katie straight back to exam rooms. I waited in the hallway while the doctor examined Emily first. He came out after about 30 minutes with a grim look on his face. He told Detective Lee he'd found clear evidence of repeated near-drowning incidents in both girls. There was fluid in their lungs that shouldn't be there. He ordered full-body x-rays for both of them to check for any broken bones from what the father called training. The mother was in the waiting room with an officer watching her. She kept trying to call her husband, but he wasn't answering. She'd switched from angry to crying and back to angry again. Every few minutes she'd yell that this was all my fault and that her girls were fine. The officer just stood there watching her without saying anything. Detective Lee asked me to write down everything Emily had told me word for word while it was still fresh in my mind. I sat in the hospital cafeteria with a notepad and wrote down every detail about the sparkles and the 4 minutes, and how Mikey went to live with Grandma, who was already dead. Around midnight, a woman in a gray suit walked into the cafeteria and introduced herself as Kirsten Finch from CPS. She sat down across from me with a thick notepad and started asking questions about everything Emily had told me. I went through it all again, the sparkles and the 4 minutes, and how Mikey was supposedly at Grandma's even though Grandma was dead. She wrote down every word and asked if I'd be willing to testify if this went to court. I told her absolutely. Through the cafeteria windows, I could see Emily's mother in the waiting room trying to push past a security guard. She was crying 1 minute, then screaming about lawyers the next, but I never saw her actually make any calls. The guard just stood there blocking her path while she kept demanding to see her daughters. Kirsten told me they'd placed an emergency hold preventing any contact until the investigation was complete. Around 1 in the morning, the doctor came to find us with Emily's toxicology report. His face was grim as he explained they'd found high levels of Benadryl in her system, way more than any child should have. He said it was a miracle she never drowned with that much sedative making her drowsy underwater. Detective Lee showed up a few minutes later with paperwork. He'd gotten a judge to sign a search warrant for the family's home and electronics based on Emily's disclosure about the camera. The judge had signed it immediately when he heard about the systematic drowning. I stayed in the hospital waiting area until 3 in the morning, wanting to be there when Emily woke up. She asked for her daddy 3 times, and each time I had to tell her he wasn't coming right now. She kept saying she needed to get home for practice, or she'd never become a real mermaid. The nurses had to give her more medicine to help her sleep. My phone rang at 6:30 the next morning. It was the principal calling to offer support, but also warning me to be careful about posting anything on social media. The school district wanted to control the narrative to protect the other students from hearing scary details. I told him I hadn't posted anything and didn't plan to. He said HR would be in touch about paid leave while I dealt with being a witness. Detective Lee called an hour later to tell me what they'd found at the house. The waterproof camera had hundreds of videos dating back 3 years. There was also a laptop with encrypted files that their tech team was working on. He said the videos alone were enough to put the father away for a long time. Katie finally started talking to the forensic interviewer that afternoon. She showed them with her doll how Daddy would hold its head underwater when it cried. She pushed the doll's face down into a cup of water and counted to 10 before pulling it up. The interviewer asked if that happened to her too, and Katie just nodded. She said Daddy told her crying meant she was weak, and weak mermaids don't get to eat. Later that day, the hospital social worker found something in their records. Emily had been treated for accidental drowning 6 months ago. The father had explained it as her falling asleep in the bathtub, and somehow nobody had questioned it further. The notes said Emily had been unconscious when they brought her in, but the father insisted it was just an accident during bath time. There were no follow-up appointments scheduled. Amara finally called me back that evening, her voice shaking. She was devastated that she'd missed all the signs, even though Emily had never said anything directly to her. She kept saying she should have known something was wrong with how tired Emily always was. We agreed to work together to support Emily when she eventually returned to the school. She said she'd already started putting together resources for the other teachers about recognizing abuse signs. The whole time we talked, I kept thinking about those videos on the camera and what 3 years of footage meant. How many times had those girls been held underwater while their mother turned up the TV? How many times had they counted to 100 waiting for sparkles that were really just their brains starting to shut down from lack of oxygen? Detective Lee told me later that the forensic team was going through every single video to document the pattern of abuse. He said some of the early ones showed the brother Mikey doing the training too. In one video from 2 years ago, Mikey's body went completely limp after being underwater for almost 4 minutes. The timestamp matched when the parents claimed he went to live with Grandma. The detective said they were now treating it as a possible homicide. Emily woke up again around dinner time and asked if she'd missed her transformation. I told her there was no practice tonight or any night, and she started crying. She said Daddy would be so disappointed that she couldn't make 4 minutes. The nurse had to explain that her daddy wasn't coming back and that she was safe now. Emily didn't understand what safe meant in this context. She kept asking who would help her become a mermaid if Daddy wasn't there. It took 3 more days before she stopped asking about practice time. The forensic nurse came in that 4th morning with a camera and measuring tape. Her name was Halima Ray, and she moved around Emily's small body with careful hands, photographing every mark and bruise while Emily slept. She found 23 different injury sites total. Some were fresh, dark purple and blue from that week, but others had turned yellow and green from weeks or even months ago. The rope burns around her ankles had layers, old scars under new wounds, showing this had been going on for a really long time. She measured each bruise with a ruler and wrote down the sizes in her notebook. The fingerprint marks on Emily's arms matched an adult male's hand size perfectly. Halima took photos from every angle and had me hold a special light that showed bruises under the skin that weren't visible yet. She found old fractures in Emily's ribs that had healed wrong and marks on her scalp where hair had been pulled out. Katie's exam was even worse because she was smaller and the injuries showed up more. While Halima worked, Detective Lee called me with news about the father. He'd been digging into military records all morning and found out the truth. The father had only been in the Navy for 2 years before getting kicked out for something called failure to adapt. He was never a SEAL, never went through any special training, never learned any real breath-holding techniques. His whole story was made up. The discharge papers showed mental health issues and problems following orders. Detective Lee said this changed everything because now they could prove the father knew he was lying to his kids about the training being real. The mother's interview happened that same afternoon in a small room at the police station. I watched through a window while she sat there crying and claiming she thought it was just strict swimming practice. The detective pushed the photos of the rope marks across the table and asked her to explain those. She broke down and admitted she knew something was wrong, but she'd turned the TV volume up really loud during practice time so she wouldn't have to hear the girls crying and screaming. She said her husband told her it was for their own good, that they needed to be strong, and she wanted to believe him. She kept saying she never thought he'd actually hurt them, but then admitted she'd seen the bruises and just put makeup on them, so nobody would ask questions. The detective asked about Mikey, and she went completely quiet for almost 5 minutes before saying he'd had an accident during practice. By that evening, both girls were being moved to an emergency foster home. The family had dealt with trauma cases before and knew how to handle kids who'd been through bad stuff. Emily didn't understand what was happening at first. When the social worker explained she wouldn't be going home, she cried for 2 hours straight, just sobbing and asking for her daddy over and over. She kept saying she'd been bad, that she'd try harder, that she'd make 4 minutes if they just let her go home. The foster mom held her while she screamed and thrashed around, and it took 3 people to get her into the car. Katie went silent and wouldn't look at anyone. She just stared at the floor and let them carry her out. My phone buzzed around midnight with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said I'd destroyed a good family, and I was going to pay for what I'd done. It called me names and said I didn't understand how families work, that I was just some stupid swim teacher who should mind their own business. I screenshot it and sent it to Detective Lee right away. He traced the number within an hour and found out it came from the father's brother. Detective Lee drove to the brother's house that night and warned him about witness intimidation charges. The brother tried to act tough, but backed down when Lee explained he could go to jail just for sending that text. 2 days later, the tech team finally cracked the encrypted files on the father's laptop. What they found made everyone sick. He was part of an online forum where parents shared videos of their kids being trained to hold their breath underwater. There were 12 different families posting videos, comparing times, giving each other advice on how to make kids stay under longer. The father had posted dozens of videos of Emily and Katie, plus old ones of Mikey from 2 years ago. The forum had rankings for which kids lasted longest and tips for using medicine to make them drowsy. Some parents were using zip ties instead of ropes. Others talked about filling bathtubs with ice water to make the kids panic less. The FBI got involved immediately because the forum crossed state lines. Emily's first therapy session was 3 days after she got to the foster home. The therapist came to the house because Emily was too scared to leave. She brought crayons and paper and just sat on the floor while Emily drew. For the whole hour, Emily only drew pictures of mermaids with long tails swimming underwater. She drew her family as mermaids, even Mikey, with a special golden tail. The therapist told me later that Emily wasn't ready to process what happened yet. She needed to feel safe first, to understand that nobody was going to hurt her anymore. She said it could take months or even years before Emily could talk about the training without breaking down. The father got arrested at his brother's house the next morning. He'd been hiding there with another laptop, trying to delete more files when the police broke down the door. They found him in the basement destroying hard drives with a hammer. He fought the officers and had to be tackled and cuffed. They charged him with aggravated child abuse, and the judge set bail at $500,000. His brother couldn't pay it, so he stayed in jail. I had to go to a meeting the next week with Kirsten from CPS, Detective Lee, and the prosecutor to talk about being a witness. They explained that cases like this take forever, maybe months or even years before trial. They'd need me to testify about what Emily told me that night at the pool, and I'd have to tell the story multiple times to different people. The prosecutor said the defense would try to make me look bad, say I misunderstood or made things up, but the evidence was so strong it wouldn't matter. Meanwhile, Katie started having night terrors at the foster home. She'd wake up screaming about water and sparkles, thrashing around in bed like she was drowning. The foster mom had to take all the bath toys out of the house because even seeing them made Katie panic and cry. She couldn't take baths at all, only quick showers with the door open and someone standing right outside talking to her the whole time. The school called me in for a big meeting the next Monday, where they brought in all the teachers and staff to talk about what happened with Emily. The principal stood at the front of the room explaining new rules about how to spot kids who might be getting hurt at home. 3 teachers raised their hands and said they'd noticed Emily falling asleep in class or coming in with bruises, but didn't know what to do about it. The counselor Amara looked sick when she admitted Emily once drew a picture of herself underwater with bubbles coming out of her mouth, but she thought it was just imagination. They made everyone sign papers saying they understood they had to report stuff like that from now on. Detective Lee called me that afternoon while I was cleaning the pool filters and told me they were looking into what really happened to Mikey. He said they'd sent requests to the town where the grandma lived to get death records and hospital files from 2 years ago. His voice got quiet when he said they thought Mikey might have drowned during one of those training sessions, and the parents made up the story about him going to live with Grandma. I had to sit down on the bleachers because my legs felt weak thinking about that little boy. Kirsten called me later that week with an update about Emily at the foster home. She said Emily kept asking her foster mom when she could go back to practicing to become a mermaid. When the foster mom explained there wouldn't be any more practice, Emily got confused and started crying, asking how she'd ever see Mikey again if she didn't transform. The foster mom had to hold her for an hour while she sobbed about missing her brother and not understanding why she couldn't finish her training. Meanwhile, the mother got charged with child endangerment and neglect, but the judge let her out without having to pay bail as long as she promised to show up for court. They gave her a paper saying she couldn't see or talk to Emily or Katie until the investigation was done. I saw her at the grocery store a few days later, and she turned around and walked the other way when she spotted me. I went back to work the next week, but everything felt different. During my Tuesday swim class, a 6-year-old boy went under to grab a pool toy, and I counted in my head automatically. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. My chest got tight, and I had to remind myself this was normal, this was safe, this was just a game. But I watched that kid like a hawk until he came up laughing with the toy in his hand. Every time any kid went underwater, I felt my whole body tense up and had to force myself not to jump in after them. The other instructors noticed I was being weird, but I couldn't explain why I kept counting seconds in my head. Detective Lee called me again on Thursday with news that made me throw up in the pool bathroom. The tech team found a video file on the father's computer labeled Mikey's graduation from 2 years ago. The video showed a little boy being held underwater in a bathtub while the father counted on his stopwatch. 4 minutes and 12 seconds before the boy went completely limp. The timestamp matched up with when Mikey supposedly moved to Grandma's house. They were treating it as a homicide now. Kirsten gave me updates about Emily adjusting to the foster home. She said Emily was starting to trust her foster parents a little bit, especially after they let her take quick showers instead of baths. The foster mom would sit outside the bathroom door and talk to her about cartoons and toys, while Emily washed her hair as fast as she could. Emily still asked about becoming a mermaid sometimes, but not as much as before. She'd started coloring pictures of regular kids playing instead of just mermaids underwater. The father's lawyer filed some papers asking for a psychiatric evaluation, claiming his client had PTSD from being in the military. The prosecutor called me to explain that they'd already checked, and the father was never in any combat situations. He got kicked out of the Navy after 2 years for psychological problems, something about failing mental health screenings. The lawyer was trying to make excuses, but the evidence was too strong. Detective Lee told me the FBI was taking over parts of the case because they'd found families from the online forum in 3 different states. Federal agents came to town and took all the digital evidence to build a bigger case against everyone involved. 12 other families were doing the same thing to their kids, following instructions from the forum about how to train them to hold their breath longer. Some parents in California, some in Texas, some in Florida, all of them recording videos and sharing tips about using medicine to make kids drowsy. Katie started working with a special therapist who came to the foster home twice a week. The therapist brought dolls and toys to help Katie show what happened, since she still wasn't talking much. During one session, Katie took the boy doll and pushed its head into a bowl of water, holding it there while she counted on her fingers. Then she made the doll stop moving and said, "All done," in this tiny voice that broke everyone's heart. The therapist had to leave the room to cry after that session. 3 weeks later, the prosecutor called me about the mother's plea hearing, and I drove to the courthouse early to get a parking spot. The mother sat at the defense table in a gray suit that looked borrowed and kept pulling at the collar like it was choking her. When the judge asked how she pleaded to the reduced charges of child endangerment, she said guilty. So quiet, they had to ask her twice. The prosecutor stood up and explained the deal where she'd get probation if she testified against her husband about what really happened in that house. She had to describe how she knew about the bathtub sessions and how she'd turn the TV volume up to drown out the girls crying and begging. Her lawyer kept touching her arm to remind her to speak louder when she admitted she saw the rope marks, but never called anyone. The judge accepted the plea and scheduled her testimony for the father's preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. I watched her walk out with her lawyer, and she looked smaller than I remembered from that night at the pool. The preliminary hearing came faster than I expected, and I spent the night before going over my notes from that evening with Emily. The courtroom was packed with reporters since the case had made national news after the FBI found those other families. I sat in the witness chair for almost 3 hours, describing every detail of what Emily told me about the mermaid game and the sparkles, and how Mikey got so many sparkles that Daddy had to call an ambulance. The defense attorney kept interrupting to suggest maybe I misunderstood a child's imagination, or that kids make up stories all the time. But then the prosecutor showed the photos I took of Emily's bruises before the concealer rubbed off and played the 911 call, where I reported systematic drowning abuse. The defense attorney asked if I had any training in child psychology, and I said no, but I know what rope marks look like. He tried to make it seem like I coached Emily, but the prosecutor had the security footage from the pool that showed our whole conversation. You could see Emily demonstrating holding her breath and counting on her fingers and pointing to her bruises. The judge ruled there was enough evidence for a full trial and denied bail again when the defense asked. Meanwhile, Emily had started first grade at a new school 20 miles from her foster home, so nobody would know her story. Kirsten told me the teacher got a full briefing about Emily's trauma, and they worked out a safety plan for if she got triggered by water activities or swimming discussions. They put her desk near the door so she could leave quickly if she needed to, and gave her a special pass to see the counselor anytime. The school didn't have a pool, which the foster parents specifically requested. About a month into the school year, Detective Lee called with news that made me sick. The investigation team had finally gotten records from the town where the grandmother lived and confirmed what we all suspected. Mikey died 2 years ago from drowning in the bathtub during what the father called an accident. The original death certificate said accidental drowning, but with all the new evidence, including that video file, they found the case was reopened as a homicide. The medical examiner was reviewing the autopsy results to see if there were signs of force that got missed the first time. Katie was making progress too, according to her foster mom, who called me with updates sometimes. She'd started speaking in full sentences again, though she still wouldn't go near any water, including the kitchen sink. The foster parents bought her finger paints and art supplies so she could express herself without words when she needed to. She painted pictures of fish and water, but always colored the water black. One day, she painted her whole family, including Mikey, as an angel, which her foster mom framed and hung in her room. The prosecutor's office sent me a letter saying the father had been offered a plea deal of 15 years in prison if he admitted to the abuse. His lawyer came back saying he rejected it completely and insisted the training was legitimate and based on military techniques. The lawyer filed papers requesting a competency evaluation, claiming his client couldn't understand the charges against him. The judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation by 2 different doctors to determine if he was competent to stand trial. During all this, Emily had a major breakthrough in therapy that Kirsten called to tell me about. The therapist had been working with her for months using play therapy, and one day, Emily suddenly stopped playing with the mermaid dolls and said they weren't real. She asked the therapist if Daddy lied about the transformation, and when the therapist gently said yes, Emily cried for over an hour. She kept asking why Daddy would lie and saying she missed Mikey and wanted to see him again. The therapist said it was healthy grief finally coming out after months of confusion. The foster family had been taking care of both girls for 3 months by then and filed paperwork to start adoption proceedings. The biological parents' rights were going to be terminated since reunification was impossible, with one parent heading to prison and the other on probation with no custody rights. The girls had started calling their foster parents by their first names instead of Mr. and Mrs., which was a big step in bonding. I started going to a support group for secondary trauma that the prosecutor's office recommended for witnesses in abuse cases. The facilitator was a retired social worker who'd seen hundreds of these cases, and she kept reminding us that saving kids didn't mean we had to carry their pain forever. We did breathing exercises and talked about how to separate our identity from the trauma we witnessed. Other people in the group included teachers and nurses and police officers who'd all discovered abuse and felt guilty they didn't see it sooner. 2 months after the competency evaluation was ordered, the reports came back, saying the father was competent to stand trial. Both psychiatrists agreed he understood the charges and could assist in his own defense, even if his beliefs about the training were delusional. The judge scheduled the trial for 6 months out to give both sides time to prepare. The prosecutor warned me I'd have to testify again and relive that whole night at the pool in front of a jury this time. 3 weeks later, Kirsten called to tell me Emily was starting swimming lessons again at the community center near her foster home. The instructor specialized in working with trauma survivors and kept Emily in the shallow end, where her feet could always touch bottom. Emily gripped the pool edge with white knuckles that first lesson, while other kids splashed around her. The instructor never pushed her to let go and just sat next to her in the water talking about dolphins and sea turtles. After 4 sessions, Emily finally pushed off the wall and floated on her back for 3 seconds before grabbing the edge again. Her foster mom sent me a video of Emily actually laughing when the instructor showed her how to blow bubbles underwater. Meanwhile, Katie was working with her therapist twice a week, using art therapy since she still wouldn't talk much. The therapist called me after one session where Katie drew her whole family with crayons and markers. She drew her daddy as a huge black monster with red eyes and sharp teeth, holding her and Emily underwater. Her mommy had no face at all, just blank skin where eyes and mouth should be. The therapist explained, this showed Katie understood her mother saw the abuse, but chose not to protect them. 2 months passed before the mother finished her court-ordered parenting classes and got permission for supervised visits. The visits happened at the CPS office with a social worker watching everything through a two-way mirror. Emily ran to hug her mom that first visit, while Katie hid behind her foster mother's legs and wouldn't come out. The mother brought coloring books and tried to get Katie to sit with her, but Katie just shook her head and pressed closer to her foster mom. Detective Lee called me one afternoon while I was teaching a class to give me an update on the investigation. The FBI had tracked down every member of that online forum using the videos they found on the father's computer. 12 children in 7 states had been rescued from similar drowning abuse situations. 37 people got arrested, including doctors and teachers, and even a pediatric nurse who all thought drowning kids were some kind of training. The forum had over 300 members sharing techniques for holding children underwater without leaving marks. Some parents drugged their kids like Emily's father did, while others used weighted belts or tied kids to pool ladders. The youngest victim they found was only 3 years old, and the oldest was 14. Detective Lee said Emily's disclosure saved all those kids because without her brave words, they never would have found that forum. 4 months into waiting for trial, the father tried to hang himself in his jail cell using torn bedsheets. The guards found him during a routine check and cut him down before he lost consciousness. They put him on suicide watch with someone checking every 15 minutes and took away anything he could use to hurt himself. His lawyer filed papers saying this proved his client was mentally ill and shouldn't stand trial, but the judge rejected it immediately. The prosecutor called to warn me the defense might try to use the suicide attempt for sympathy during trial. Around that same time, Emily had a huge breakthrough that her foster mom called to tell me about. They were getting ready for bed one night when Emily suddenly announced she didn't want to be a mermaid anymore. She said she liked breathing air and didn't want to live underwater even if she could grow a tail. Her foster mom said it was the first time Emily talked about the abuse as something bad instead of special training. The trial date finally arrived 6 months after that night at the pool. The courthouse was packed with reporters since the case had made national news after the FBI arrests. The prosecutor gave her opening statement describing how the father systematically tortured his children by drowning them repeatedly. She showed photos of the rope marks and bruises and played a clip from one of the videos where you could hear Katie screaming underwater. The defense attorney claimed the father genuinely believed he was helping his children based on misguided military training techniques. He said it wasn't malicious abuse, but a tragic case of a mentally ill veteran who needed help, not prison. On the second day, I took the stand and testified for 3 straight hours about that night at the pool. The prosecutor had me repeat Emily's exact words about sparkles and becoming a real mermaid and transforming after 4 minutes. She asked me to describe finding the bruises under the concealer and the rope marks on Emily's ankles. I explained how Emily thought her brother Mikey had moved to Grandma's house, when really he had drowned during one of these sessions. The defense attorney tried to make it seem like I misunderstood a child's imagination, but I stuck to exactly what Emily told me. He asked if I had any training in child psychology or forensic interviewing, and I said no, but I knew abuse when I saw it. The jury only took 4 hours to deliberate before coming back with guilty verdicts on every single count. The father sat completely still, showing no emotion, like he still believed he did nothing wrong. 2 weeks later at sentencing, the judge called it the worst case of child abuse he'd seen in 30 years on the bench. He sentenced the father to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The father's lawyer immediately filed an appeal, but everyone knew it wouldn't go anywhere with all that evidence. The mother's sentencing happened 3 weeks later in a packed courtroom. She stood there in a black dress, looking smaller than I remembered from that night at the pool. The judge read through her charges while she stared at her hands folded on the table. When he said 5 years probation and mandatory therapy sessions twice a week, she just nodded. The prosecutor explained she'd lost all parental rights permanently, but could write letters to Emily and Katie. Their therapist would decide when the girls were ready to read them. I watched her sign the papers, giving up her daughters with a shaking hand. 6 months passed before the adoption was final. Emily and Katie's foster parents invited me to the courthouse for the signing ceremony. The girls wore matching purple dresses and held hands the whole time. Emily smiled when the judge asked if she wanted to take her foster parents' last name. Katie whispered yes, so quietly, the judge had to ask her again. After signing all the papers, they had a small party at their house with chocolate cake and presents. Emily got new swim goggles and Katie got a paint set. The foster mom took pictures of everyone together in the backyard. Emily started swimming again that fall on a real team at the YMCA. She was scared at first and wouldn't put her face in the water for the first 2 practices. The coach was patient and let her wear a life jacket even in the shallow end. By November, she was swimming freestyle across the whole pool without stopping. At her first meet in December, she came in third place in the 25-yard freestyle. She slept with that yellow ribbon under her pillow for a month. Her new parents framed it and hung it in her room next to her school pictures. Katie took longer to get near water again. Her therapist started with just letting her play with cups of water and toy boats. Then they moved to putting her feet in a kiddie pool while sitting on the edge. It took 4 months before she'd get in a bathtub with toys instead of taking showers. She still preferred quick showers, but wasn't frozen with fear anymore when she saw water. One day, she even asked to go to the beach to build sandcastles. The letter from Emily came to the pool in February, almost a year after that night. She'd drawn the envelope herself with markers and put 3 stamps on it, even though it only needed 1. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper with her careful handwriting. "Thank you for saving me and Katie from the mermaid game," it said at the top. She drew a picture of us at the pool, but this time we were both standing on the deck smiling. She'd drawn herself holding a swim ribbon, and Katie was there too, with a big smile. At the bottom, she wrote, "I like breathing air now," with a smiley face. The family held a memorial for Mikey on what would have been his 10th birthday. Emily and Katie picked out blue and green balloons at the party store because those were his favorite colors. They wrote messages on pieces of paper and tied them to the balloon strings. Emily's said, "I'm sorry you had to transform without us," and Katie drew a picture of 3 kids playing together. They let the balloons go in a park near their new house while their adoptive parents held them. The balloons floated up until they were just tiny dots in the sky. 2 years after that night at the pool, Emily's therapist called to tell me about a conference. Emily wanted to speak at a child safety event about recognizing abuse. She was 11 now and had been working on her speech for weeks. I sat in the back row and watched her walk up to the microphone. She had to stand on a box to reach it properly. She told a room full of adults about the mermaid game without crying once. She explained how she thought drowning was normal because her daddy said so. She said other kids needed to know that real parents don't hurt you for practice. When she finished, everyone stood up and clapped for a long time. Katie turned 7 that spring, the same age Emily was when I met her. Her parents signed her up for swim lessons at the same pool where I worked. I wasn't her teacher, but I watched from the office window. She jumped into the shallow end and went underwater for just a second before popping back up. She was laughing and splashing with the other kids in her class. When the teacher said to try the deep end, Katie swam there without hesitating. She came up quickly, choosing to surface whenever she wanted instead of counting or waiting. Her parents were recording it on their phones and cheering from the bleachers. That's when I knew they were really going to be okay. Thanks for sticking with me through all this. It's definitely been a journey worth sharing. Until we meet again, folks. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.